All right, welcome and thank you for being here today. You guys having an awesome day? Yeah. Awesome, perfect. Well, welcome and thank you for coming to our First Generation Stories event. This is our second event like this. We did this once just before the pandemic, and so we're back. To hear the wonderful stories of folks who have endured and getting through college first generation style, and that's not getting a ton of help from the family, and that is a lot what our programs do here, is to kind of fill that gap, come in and wrap around services and help our students get through. So today we're here to hear some of the stories from some of the folks who actually work here. So we are going to start off, and feel free, obviously get something to eat. This is kind of like a fireside chat here. We're going to listen to some of these stories. Our first speaker, she is very dear to all of us. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Sierra Graham. Sierra is the Dean of EDI Cares.
All right. Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Yeah. Good. Really happy you're here. All right. So I'm going to share a little bit about my story. And I know we have some people, getting food, but that's okay. So I just want to thank Jen and Terry for putting on this event. Of course, before I start speaking, I want to thank the labor that was involved in this. So thank you all for your hard work and tenacity to make this happen. So, my story. So throughout my life, I have learned that stories connect and inspire us. Our stories cultivate the boldness in us, while at the same time encouraging our audiences to tap into their own boldness and power. I share pieces of myself today to spark and ignite the boldness and confidence in many of you, so you all can feel empowered to take pride in your first generation story and own it. In many ways, navigating life as both a Black female and a first generation college student is often a story that is untold. It's a story that's filled with both strife and success, a story that is often quieted and overshadowed. I stand on the shoulders of ancestors who have had their stories ripped away, their truths contested, and their voices silenced. My presence as an accomplished Black female in a dean role, being the first in my family to pursue a PhD degree, is powerful. And this moment of sharing my story is something that I do not take lightly. So as a first generation college student and a student of color, one thing I learned very early on was the importance of hard work. The constant message of you have to work twice as hard to get half as far was constantly ingrained in me from my mother and father, who grew up during the height of the civil rights movement. I was raised by two of the hardest working people that I know, and I credit my resolve, my perseverance, and all of my Black girl magic to their working class values and morals. So my father was a past machinist at Boeing. He woke up every morning at 4 o'clock. For 33 years, he worked tirelessly, provided financial support for his family, and even found time to coach high school basketball for a neighborhood team during the evenings. My mother was a grocery store clerk for 30 years. She stood for hours on edge, never broke a smile, and treated every customer as if they were family. Oftentimes, she would work 12-hour days and come home and cook dinner for my brother and I. She's also native to the state of Louisiana. She valued family dinners and relished in cooking, and family time was very important, even despite her long and restless days. I cannot recall one single moment where my parents ever complained about work. Instead, they did their best to really ensure that my brother and I understood the value of hard work. Their blue-collar jobs also signaled to my brother and I that attending and graduating from college could drastically alter our lives, our stories, and our legacy. So I started my career at Washington State University. and I found myself living 5 hours away from a very diverse metropolitan city and my hometown of Seattle. And I traded that in for a predominantly white and rural, middle of nowhere town called Pullman. Some of you may be familiar with that. So my parents never had the opportunity to step foot on a college campus. Terms like office hours, syllabus, financial aid, that was very foreign to them. Despite my parents' lack of understanding, they knew that college was a way out of low-wage labor, and that finding a career based on my passion and not one based on necessity was something that I needed. So when I started undergrad, my parents were very proud. Their parenting and their prayers got me there, and their determination allowed me to understand how the goal of attending college and eventually graduating was much bigger than myself. I remember my mother's last words when she dropped me off on campus, and they were, "Girl, you better not embarrass me, and you better act like you got some sense." So translation, that means you better succeed or else. So I didn't have the context that many students have to help them navigate the college environment. I did not understand what it meant to succeed in college. I did not realize that college required you to be self-reliant and independent at times. This went against the value that I had been raised with for most of my life, and that was community above self. I did not understand the purpose of office hours, and meeting one-on-one with a professor actually frightened me. Admitting that I didn't understand a math problem or a concept intimidated me. Being a student who didn't understand something was one thing, but being a black female student and admitting that you didn't understand something was unheard of. It became quite clear in this moment that I had internalized many of the messages that black women are indoctrinated with. And those messages are, don't take up too much space and don't draw too much attention to yourself. I ended my first semester at Washington State University with a 2.3. I was baffled. I was an honor roll high school student with dreams and big goals, and I had the support of my family, and a 2.3 frankly felt like a letdown, and I felt like a failure. My confidence was at an all-time low, and feelings of self-doubt continued to waver. Timing never worked in my favor because at this time my father was also diagnosed with a non-malignant brain tumor. I'm sure that you can imagine that managing feelings of self-doubt while also managing the emotional turmoil of a sick family member made me want to quit college. So as a black female, we're taught to be strong. We're taught to be a superhero. And many of us, like myself, have been raised to show strength and resolve during times of fear and despair. When we feel sad or angry, we dismiss our feelings because we are taught that black women cannot be anything but strong, formidable, unaffected, and unemotional. The "I can do bad all by myself" mantra still stays with me today. There was much shame that I had in asking for help, and I honestly couldn't even bring myself to say that I needed help at the time. My parents couldn't attend annual college events like Mom and Dad's weekend because their jobs didn't afford them the extra time off. Many non-first generation college students, they talked about their study abroad trips or special academic or scholarship opportunities that their parents had participated in. They had a legacy to follow and a roadmap. I could not relate. I did not have the language or the cultural experiences that they had. I did not have access to financial resources to take trips for leisure, because what was a spring break to Sierra? And leaving home during the summer was really never an option for me. Most of my summer breaks were spent working at a local retail store. As a first-generation college student, I had to deal with the fear of running out of money and constantly feeling as if I never had enough. So I share this particular piece of my story to let you know, especially the students in the room, that much of the thoughts and feelings and experiences that you have are completely normal. And to demonstrate that while I may look and sound like success, My story is also filled with much strife and self-doubt. My low GPA forced me to contemplate dropping out, and I constantly questioned my sense of place and belonging. And so much of my focus throughout my undergraduate education was spent on trying to make money that I questioned the true value of education. I also want to share that much of my success as a first-generation college student is credited to community. I knew I had to do more than just make myself proud. I had to make those around me proud. And I needed to cultivate my own community for my own healing and liberation. Programs like TRIO provided me with the academic and financial resources to perform better academically, while also giving me the self-confidence and community support to realize that my experiences were also connected to those who also shared my identity. Being involved in clubs like Black Student Union, I was able to really explore how multidimensional Blackness was, and really explore the diversity in which I get to show up in spaces. And this was truly liberating for me. It wasn't until I joined the Black Student Union and other predominantly Black and brown spaces in college that I realized how much of myself I had really lost and sacrificed due to the need to fit into white heteronormative culture. Education has truly become my liberation. I became ignited to challenge its oppressive systems that upheld racism and classism. I remember the moment where I was bestowed the title of doctor. My parents had the opportunity to see and hear me present my dissertation research, and they cried that day, as did I. And my mom did indeed say, there are no words to describe how proud she was of me. Their prayers, their hopes, and their aspirations all culminated in this very moment. They saw me over the course of 2 years work very hard on a research project while managing 2 jobs. They saw me present research with confidence that centered Black culture while also confidently tackling tough research questions for my committee members. They saw me boldly craft my own identity as a scholar, a researcher, a teacher, an influencer, a daughter, and a Black female. They saw me becoming their wildest dreams. A PhD really gave me access to professional circles, and I would have never had this access without a college degree. It encouraged me to be a contributor of knowledge instead of a passive recipient of it. A Black female with a PhD became even more of a power symbol and a sign of resistance. I was able to represent how attainable a PhD was to other women of color, but also to pursue research and build programs that centered the experiences of Black people. Being in a position to truly liberate and celebrate others is what I love to do. I aim to empower students just like me so they can recognize the incredible value that they bring and just how powerful they truly are. So my advice to all first-gen students in the room is to share your story just like I did. Own it, find and build your community, and find something that truly liberates and heals you.
All right, thank you, Sierra. Any questions for Sierra? And we don't have to have questions. If you have a question, just want to give you the time to ask any. All right. Well, thank you. All right. So that brings us to our next speaker. He is from Puyallup. Student success coach. Please welcome Luis Enchanes.
Hi everyone, how's everyone doing today? Thank you all for being here today and allowing me to share my story with you. So my college career began as a junior in high school. Me and my 2 best friends decided we're going to go do Running Start. And Running Start, it's very difficult for all these reasons, but for me it was little bit extra difficult. We had a carpool, so the three of us, our parents would drop us off. They would drop us off in the morning, fairly early in the morning, usually half an hour, so we'd have to wait around kind of anywhere that was warm, essentially, because you know how cold it gets out here. And on the way back home, we would have to take the bus back, about a 2-hour bus ride. And the Des Moines area is kind of, the bus rides are always kind of interesting. And so on top of this, I was also working part-time. I had to pay for all my fees, books, and then anything else that comes along with Running Start. And I was also a part of sports, so my days were fairly long. I would leave the home 7, sometimes get back 6 or 7, just kind of depending on where the sports kind of ended out. And so Running Start, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. It really tests you. It's a lot to ask for a 16, 17-year-old to do these college classes. But for me, I thought it was a good challenge, and so I wanted to do it. And one quarter, it made it excessively hard. I was fairly disappointed because I did not place into an above 100 level class. So I needed to take a Math 98 course. So this would mean that I would be behind 5 credits. I would have to pay roughly $500 out of pocket. And for a 16-year-old, sounds like a lot of money. So I was fairly stressed at this point, but I got through it. Slowly but surely, things worked out at Highline. Until I got into my biology class. It was my first anatomy class. I felt confident going into it, but things did not go well. And I unfortunately didn't take responsibility. I blamed my instructor just because on average tests and quizzes were usually failing in the class. But it was really up to me. I didn't take responsibility, and I waited too long to make these changes. And sadly, I ended the quarter with my lowest GPA that I've ever received, a 2.3 GPA. And I told myself that I wouldn't let this happen again. I would ask earlier for help. And in the following year, when I went to Central, I would make these changes. And so I graduated from Highline, and I went to Central Washington University the following year. And my first year was rather tough. I took the entire biochem series together. The first 3 quarters, along with a different math class, statistics and pre-calculus. So the first year was rather tough, especially chemistry for me. I think chemistry is one of those subjects either you get or you don't. It's also one of the most failed courses at Central. Fortunately, they had tutoring sessions Tuesdays and Thursdays for 2 hours a day. 2 hours those days. I would be there as soon as they started, and I would leave as soon as they left, because I needed all the help I could get. If I didn't go to those tutoring sessions, I probably would have failed those classes. So I was fortunate enough that they had those tutoring sessions. But the one thing about that first year is that I was so consumed in all my courses, I didn't have a lot of time for any extracurriculars or anything for my mental health. It was fairly rough. I wasn't sleeping too well. I was always stressed. And I didn't really get to see my friends too often. So after that year, I told myself, never again. I need to find a better solution. I need to manage my time better. And that's what I set out my sophomore year. And so my sophomore year came. I decided I was going to join the tennis club team. Very fun. And there's not a lot of things to do in Central. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, the Berg. Yeah. And but they have a lot of hiking spots, which is very fun. So the year went by, things started to go well, until I got into my last quarter of that year. For whatever reason, scheduling-wise, I had to take the entire sequence of exercise science together. So exercise science 350, 351, 352, just kind of how my schedule ended out. And I had to get permission just because each class kind of built upon the past. But I felt confident. Things were going well, so I decided, I can do this. It should be okay. And it was definitely not okay. So after several weeks, I kind of found out that I hadn't been doing too hot. Probably like a C or D in each one of my classes. And it didn't hit me until I took an exam in my exercise science 350 class. I was ready to turn it in. It was an anatomy class, so I was ready to turn it in. And as I was turning it in, I read at the top, and it said, please label your answers left or right, indicating body part. And I did not do this. So I essentially failed the test. So I turned the test in. I went back to my dorm. I dropped all my things, and I went next door to my best friends, who just happened to live next door to me. And I just sat there and cried. This is a very tough moment for me. I was overwhelmed. It just kind of hit me. You know, I'm going to fail all my classes. I'm going to have to retake all these classes. I'll be behind 15 credits. I'm not going to graduate on time. And I just kind of went through all these emotions that day. My best friends did everything they could to cheer me up. But I just went back into my room and just kind of went through all these thoughts. I probably didn't sleep until 1 or 2 in the morning, just kind of going over all these negative thoughts in my mind. But I woke up the following day relieved in a way, because I got all those negative thoughts out of my mind. And I told myself, you know, I can turn this around. I can still do it. But I'm going to need some help. I looked to my peers for advice, study groups, anything that they could do to, you know, help me keep going. I went over to the staff and asked for questions, asked for advice, anything that they could give me to kind of put me in the right direction. And so the quarter went by, things are starting to kind of work out for me. And then finals week came by. Finals are always very stressful. My tests made up, 10 to 30% of my final grade, so I knew I had to do well. And I remember one piece of advice one of my TAs had mentioned to me, and he had told me, right before bed, remind yourself that you've done everything that you could possible to put yourself in a position to be successful. Because usually before bed, the day before exams, you're always going to be stressed. There's always a lot of stress. But just try to calm yourself down so you can get a good night's sleep. And that's what I did. So after the finals week, I received my final grades. And it just happened to be the highest GPA quarter I've ever received. And this was just a big moment for me because at one point in the quarter, I was failing. I didn't think I could do it. And I think it always seems impossible until it's done. And that was fairly true for me. So fast forward to my last quarter of classes at Central. I was doing well. It's a beautiful thing when things work out the way they're supposed to. And so I was taking a test. I completed it. We got our grades back the following day. And our instructor mentioned the highest score was a 99%. The average was around a B. And he started passing back the test. And he looked at me and said, good work, and gave me my test. I looked at the very top, and it was a 99%. This was a big moment for me. I'd never scored the highest grade in the class, and it was a tough exam, 10 pages, short answer. I still have that test in my room. Because it reminds me of what I'm capable of doing. Even though it may seem impossible, you can make it possible. So if you all leave with anything from my story today, it's that if you put yourself in a position to be successful, even if you fail from time to time, it'll work out in the end. Thank you guys.
All right. Thank you, Luis. All right. Any questions? Anybody have a question for Luis? He'll answer it. Yes.
What was your major?
Clinical physiology.
Oh, wow.
Good question. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. Next up, our next speaker, also a student success coach, but here at Fort Steilacoom. Please welcome Justy Fitzenrider.
Hello. Okay. So before I get started, also I did not take Communication Studies 220 like some of the students in here, so public speaking is not my strong suit. So if I don't look up too much, ignore that. Before I get started, I just wanted to acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples and their ancestral homelands, specifically Steilacoom, Puyallup, and Nisqually, as we gather here for this opportunity to learn, grow, and connect as first-generation students, faculty, staff, and as an institution. My name is Justy. I'm a student success coach here at Fort Steilacoom, and I was a first-generation student. So I come from a single-parent home. My mom worked nights, so I was basically handed off to family members at night, babysitters, things like that. And in all of these different environments, higher education was never a topic. So I just wanted take you guys down a little trip of my different understandings of what higher education was. So my first understanding was I figured out what UW was, and that was because I used to watch games with my grandpa. And as a very little kid, I didn't know what a university was. I didn't know what a college was. I was just like, I'm gonna go to UW and play basketball and hang out with a Husky all day. So that was my understanding of what higher ed was. I was a good student. I loved school, besides, normal craziness that you got to go through in school. But I loved it. I loved doing my work. I loved learning. But life, as you all may know, is gonna life, and she's gonna do it however she wants. My mom ended up moving us to a different area here in Pierce County, and things just started falling to the wayside. I started hanging out with the wrong crowd. My home life was deteriorating, and I was just doing things I should not have been doing. I distinctly remember at some point in time, someone that lived in my household told me that I was going to be nothing but a hood rat baby mom, and I was going to amount to nothing. A couple months later, if we fast forward, it was the last day of 10th grade. It was a couple of hours before the end of the school day. And I grabbed my stuff, I walked out, walked 2 miles home, and was like, I'm never entering that school again. And I never did. I ended up moving a couple weeks later into my godparents' house. And I ended up getting my first job. I believe I was 15 or 16. And I worked there for a couple months. It was around October. I had all these great plans, right? Like, I'm 15, 16. I'm going to work as a dishwasher and get my own apartment. Yeah, that's not going to happen. So my god sister that I was living with, she was currently in a program that was being offered and is still offered over at TCC called the Fresh Start program. And it is for students who didn't maybe do well or fit in very well with the regular high school environment. And this is leading into my second understanding of college. Higher education was going to TCC for that program. I started loving school again. I was like, these classes are so interesting. There's no drama here. I don't have to pay for anything. This is great. And on top of that, they had an iguana in the science building that I used to like watching. So I ended up graduating with my high school diploma. I busted my butt off for it. It took me a full 2 years. I graduated technically a year late, but I was so proud of myself because of things that were told to me about myself in the past. And so that leads into my third understanding of higher education. Now, mind you, the Fresh Start program was free entirely. You didn't pay for books, you didn't pay for classes, tuition, student fees, nothing. If you needed supplies, typically, if it was severe enough, they would provide it for you. So when I started applying for colleges, and also disclaimer, things are very different now and they've gotten better since I was applying to colleges, so this hopefully doesn't happen anymore. But when I was applying for community colleges in the area, I applied to the first one. I was accepted, but they wouldn't give me funding because they based it off of my mom's income. I hadn't lived with my mom in a couple years. And on top of that, if we really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty, My mom was paying for all of her bills, including her cancer bills. She could not afford to help me whatsoever. The financial aid in that department in that institution didn't give me any other options. They didn't tell me about financial aid. They didn't tell me about scholarships. And so me not having any guidance was like, maybe this isn't for me. But somebody was like, why don't you just try applying to another college? So I did. This college I got into, I received funding, which was amazing. But there was a couple of things that I think some first generation students might struggle with sometimes. Back then, we didn't have just regular advisors. We had just faculty advisors. We didn't have student success coaches. It was just the faculty. My faculty advisor was like kind of weird, and not in like a creepy way. It was just like, this is awkward. I hate going to see you. I don't know what classes I'm supposed to take. You're not breaking down to me what I'm supposed to be doing. And it was just like, yeah, okay, give me my classes. All right, I'm gone. Which turned out fine. But it was just awkward. And then there was another hiccup. Louise kind of brought it up where struggling with classes. I had to take statistics 3 times. I never wanted to take statistics again in my life after I barely passed it. So that basically wrapped up my associate's degree. I graduated, felt great, but I was like, you know what? I kind of want to like keep going. I want to help people. I've been to counseling before. I loved my sociology classes and my psychology classes. I want to be a counselor. So I applied to a university, and the thing about that was I never was told like what to look out for universities. Like, do they even have the things that you want to do? Do they have programs that you're interested in? Like, what, how much can they help their students with funding? Like, I was never told these things, so I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna apply to this place. I got accepted, but like I said, no one told me these things. I didn't even take into consideration transfer stuff. So when I got there, I met with my advisor for the first time. I'm so excited because I want to just get started. And they were like, what do you want to do? I want to be a counselor, psychology, sign me up. They were like, okay, sounds good. Let me look at your transcripts. Says you graduated or like you passed your psychology class, or not psychology, your statistics class with it was like a 2 point something, but it wasn't high enough for the university. So they were like, you would have to take statistics again. I said, excuse my French, hell no, never take it. You will never catch me in another statistics class. So I was like, scratch psychology, scratch counseling, not doing it, don't care enough. But the thing is that, and another thing having to deal going into university status is like, I also let my family influence me a lot, and I feel like that shouldn't have happened. I wanted to go to like the University of Hawaii. I wanted to go to Berkeley, Berkeley Cal, because I have family that lives down the street from there. And I had like family members up here that were like, you can't do that. You can't leave us. You can't do that. So I stayed. And that was okay, because I'm happy with like everything that happened, the results, where I'm at and stuff like that. But it was just kind of a downer. Like, there were other things I could have experienced. But when I went to this university, I started to get my groundings. I started to get a better understanding of higher education and how it works. I started understanding funding, transfer stuff, all the things that you need to know, I started getting. And then it hit me, and it was like, now that I'm starting to get this stuff, I'm starting to like understand. And I'm like, I want to start giving this knowledge back. So for my project, I created a documentary about an underrepresented neighborhood in Tacoma. And I just thought it was like, okay, this is like my baby. I love it, but everybody else is probably going to hate it. The really cool thing is that wanting to give back and like understanding like the power that you can hold when it comes to like higher education and like the opportunities that it offers to you. I was in a film festival with it. I'm also a part of the Tacoma Public Library. Like they have it in their system now and stuff. And it's really cool because like, you know, there's these people that are like, oh, this neighborhood is just and it's like, no, watch this. And then they get this new idea of things. But that was that understanding of higher ed. My final understanding of higher ed is like what I call like the other side, and that's me being here now. When I was looking for jobs, I always would check like local community colleges and universities and stuff like that just because I like education. I like working with people, all that. And I saw the job listing for this like student success coach. You're basically going to be like an advisor. You're going to help students pick out their classes, if they need resources, if they need this, if they need that. And I was like, if Pierce College doesn't hire me, they'd better hire someone that's going to take care of their students like I would. Because I was like, I don't want students to have to go through what I went through. I don't want my students to come into my cubicle and leave clueless. I want them to know exactly what they need to expect. I want them to know that they can come to me if they need to. And I just was like, man, if I don't get that job, they better get someone in there that's going to care as much as I do right now about this position. So there was that. So I have a couple takeaways. A couple have already been mentioned, but I will just elaborate. So when it comes to being a first generation student, I think for one, it's really important to build your success network. I didn't do that. I struggled a lot. Put yourself out there, build connections with faculty, staff, different departments, like other students, like things will start to make more sense the bigger your circle is. 2, create boundaries. It's okay to distance yourself from people when you know you need to focus. Or you can set a time limit. If you know you got a paper due, but you really know that you need that mental healing and just need to get out for a while, set a time limit on it. And on top of that, the people that truly love and care for you are going to be understanding, and they're going to be there for you. They're going to get that you're busy, you got to focus, you got stuff to do. 3, expect the unexpected. Because like I said earlier, life is going to life, and she's going to life the way she wants to life. She don't care about how we feel and what we need at the moment, but we have to go through it. And that's okay, because to me personally, like, I feel like the best way to learn is when you're uncomfortable, because it's forcing you to get through it. Also, a part of that one, the expect the unexpected, do the thing. I don't like public speaking, I'm doing the thing. And then the last one is give yourself credit. Before you think of just yourself, I want you to think back. Think back to your parents. Think back to your grandparents. Think back to your ancestors. Think, and for me, we call them kapuna. They were like the knowledge holders. They knew what to pass down to us. And sometimes things would get disconnected. So think of the fact that some of our elders and our ancestors went through horrors. Some of them went through their own versions of systematic oppression, and then some of them have gone through their own trials and tribulations and had to learn along the way. They made a difference for us, and you're here now, today. Now think about yourself. Give yourself credit. Think of all the craziness that you've been through, and you're still here. You're earning an education, you're building connections, and you're here to better the future, whether if it's related to or not. That's it for me. Thank
Success Coach Justy! Thank you. Any questions for Justy? Any questions?
How long did it take you to realize you needed to build up that network?
Probably when I worked on my master's. When I worked on my bachelor's, it was like starting to click. But when I worked on my master's, I was like, I should have done this forever ago. Like, I shouldn't have kept to myself. It was very much a student that was like, I'm coming to school, I'm going to class, I'm going home, I'm not staying here. But when I worked on my master's, I was like, no, it's kind of important to get to know the people that are grading your papers, who are assigning your classes, who are helping you in the tutoring center. Like, yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right. Moving on to our next speaker here. Please welcome faculty from Transitional Education over at Puyallup. Here is Alfonso Montero.
City. And I just got here at 2 a.m., so I'm a little tired too from a trip from Chicago. Terry, thank you for the invitation, and also EDI Care, thank you for putting this together, the whole team. It's a lot of work. And just curious, who here is first generation college student? Oh, that's awesome. Okay, that's great. And who's a student here? I don't know if I saw a student. Oh, okay, it's you. Okay. Well, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Alfonso Montero, I was born in Guanajuato, Mexico, land of the Purepecha people, which is central West Mexico. Not the day I came to this earth or the day I was conceived, but the Himba people of north of Namibia in southwest Africa, the day the thought came in my mom's mind. And I describe vocation because I don't like generalization. Even academia doesn't do a good job in specifying, because how can you generalize a continent of 54 countries, the most diverse continent in the world? And when we talk about things, good intentions may lead to worse results because we generalize a lot. So I always have to describe places and things like that. But anyways, when I was conceived in my mom's womb at 5 months, we came to, on a winter, we came to Chicago. And a few months later, on a hot summer, I was born in this earth, not projected as a human animal. And after a year and a half, we went back to Mexico, and I lived there for 7 more years before returning to Chicago. And my experience in Chicago wasn't as enjoyable as in Mexico, because in Mexico it was out in the open and visiting my grandparents in the ranch and riding horses. But in Chicago, because when I arrived, I was constructed as the other, and I realized I was considered a Latino, and with that label came consequences such as white gangs chasing me all the time because I must belong to a certain gang because I'm Latino. And then also by Latino gangs because I must be a gang member. So it was really challenging, always kind of watching my back. And then once I got to high school, it became worse. One of my best friends was killed due to gang violence. And I graduated from high school. I thought I had good grades. I was getting A's, B's, and C's. But once so I applied to universities. I wanted to study aviation. I wanted to fly airplanes. And I was rejected by a few universities because my ACT scores were very low. And so I went to a local college. And I realized I needed to take non-credit courses before taking the credit courses. And I failed, but with the support of this tutoring, I was able to pass that and then take credit courses. And then I remember failing in math and in English and English 101. And I asked my professor, what can I do to improve? And all he asked was, what high school did you go to? And he said, and I told him, and he said, no wonder. And so just having a lot of marks on my English paper was an eye-opener. And meeting another classmate who grew up in a different zip code, I realized that in high school she was doing 10-page papers while I was doing half-a-page paper and talking about my scariest moment. She was visiting the Chicago Stock Exchange as a field trip. I was going to the local zoo, Brooklyn Zoo. She was taking computer classes while I was sent to take classes in wood shop and auto shop. And so I realized that I grew up in the wrong zip code, and so I needed to, so then I needed to do something about it, and I never thought about quitting. So the question is, give me 1 second, sorry. What did I do to get through college? Because I failed once, and then I failed the second time in my English and math. And so it was perseverance. And perseverance is taking action despite the challenges, the difficulty, and it's the attitude that you have. What attitude did I have? Well, one of the attitudes I had, and it may sound negative, but it's not, it's constructive revenge. What is constructive revenge? Meaning I felt that I was denied a competitive education, and so I want to work hard not to catch up with the bright students, but leapfrog ahead. And so I took advantage of all the sources available in college and taking speed reading and all these different classes in order to help me succeed. But also, just since I was in school, I would always hear talks on our school because most of us, 90-something% of the students would get free luncheon, so we're poor. We're victims, we're oppressed, we're at-risk students, we're all these different labels are given to us. So instead of being the victim, I decided to play the victorious attitude rather than playing the victim card. I'm not a victim. How can I be a victim? I'm privileged. I speak more than one language. And by speaking more than one language, I have a better understanding of, because certain things you just can't translate. Language is more than communication. Also, I have a better understanding of people that are illiterate, because my dad was illiterate, but also my grandparents, and they have wisdom, stuff that you can't learn in a formal education. And so I looked at all my privileges that I had, but also having lived in 2 countries, so I was able to see more than one world. Think of allegory of the cave. I had left the cave and smelled, touched, taste different perspectives. So I have advantages. How can I not be privileged? The other thing was my dad's values that were instilled in me. He was a hard worker. He worked at a factory for many years, 40 years or so, and he never missed work, despite being sick or whatever. And so the value of hard work was instilled in me, and not because what he told me, work hard, but the only advice he gave me, like, I wanted you to go to school so you don't work as hard or suffer as much as I did. but it was more of seeing him in action, leading by example. And that's true leadership, when you actually lead by example. And so just seeing him working hard every single day, and knowing that he came to this country because my grandpa came to this country through the Bracero program, which was a relationship between the U.S. and Mexico. Obviously, the bigger farmers are the ones that benefited, but then that Bracero program was cut in the early 60s, and my dad came to the policy of no policy, meaning, well, if they're going to discriminate based on where I'm coming from, but have values of hard work to contribute to this country, that I'm coming, and not illegally, but undocumented. There's no such thing as illegal, because when the states, a lot of the states were annexed from Mexico to U.S., a lot of Americans, because of their ethnicity, were deported to Mexico, even though they were part of the states. So not guilty until proven so, right? So that's why I don't use the word legal. And so my dad came 3 days through the desert, surviving, drinking cow piss, excuse the language, in order to survive. So then for me to having to stay up late to study or get up early to study, that's nothing. How's that pain? How's that sacrifice compared to what he did, right? So just seeing his struggles was inspiration. And that gave me confidence, right? What is confidence? I don't know if it's Latin or maybe old French language, con, with, fidence, with trust. So I had trust in myself. I had the abilities to succeed, but also I had trust that I didn't know anything, meaning Socrates, know that you know nothing, be the smartest in the room. So that pushed me to continue learning, unlearning, and relearning. And so as I continue my journey, next thing you know, I successfully transferred to a four-year university. I studied aviation. I was in the dean's list. I was in 4 different student clubs, founder of 2, competing in the flight team, being division champions, and studying abroad in Spain, traveling Europe, volunteering in Mexico, where it was another reminder with the indigenous and the Mayans. They helped me see the importance of the spirituality, but also the wisdom of non-formal education, that it's hard to get, because some of the smartest people I met were the indigenous, that they were able to see the interconnections between all disciplines and discussing not human rights, but living rights, the plants, the humans, the animals. So they just helped me continue wanting to learn more, and curiosity is just what kept me going, right? And the last thing that helped me succeed, I think, and continues to help me, is that I am I don't know how many people here speak Spanish, but the word is necio. Necio is foolish. So you have to be foolish to succeed. Like, what kid of immigrant parents is going to succeed? If I knew that I would have worked, traveled, volunteered, and studied in over 85 countries, have a master's and a doctorate degree, I would have never believed it, right? And so it was my foolishness to continue doing the most unimaginable things, and success is like an addiction. The more you get it, the more you want it. It's like, well, and then the more you see, you work with people from all walks of life, the more likely you're able to see that, you know what, they're just human the same way as I am. So we have the same opportunities. So maybe I have to work a little harder, and that's it. But it's working a little harder. It's nothing. As one of my coaches, Tim Grover, who was coach of Michael Jordan, not to me individually, I'm not an athlete, as you can see, but like being part of a team, as he said, pressure is a privilege. And so that's part of success, right? Pain and pressure. but it's nothing close to what my dad experienced in order to succeed in this country. And he was proud of being part of this country because everything he gave him and everything he gave this country. And he was proud to become not a citizen but a resident. And thanks to this country, where he was able to own 2 homes, have everything's paid for, have properties in Mexico, land, animals. I mean, just amazing success that he's had despite not being able to read and write. Just his values of hard work. And then the opportunities that I've gotten also because of that. So to conclude, I don't know if I went over the 12 minutes. It's so all these things I talked about: perseverance, curiosity, constructive revenge. All those things are so important, and it's a cycle that I continue applying, continue to learn, unlearn, and relearn, and continue to grow, not just professionally, but physically. Just did a ultra marathon just before COVID. Professionally, spiritually, which is the most important thing, I believe. So critical in leadership, knowing that it's not about you, it's about being bigger than self, as we're all interconnected one way or another. That's something I realized through my travels. The more I travel, the more I realize more of the similarities than the differences. And so just continue to be curious and continue learning and relearning, and amazing things happen. So thank you.
Professor of College Success, Alfonso! Any questions?
I was going to say, do you have any brothers and sisters, and what made you go from aviation to teaching or education?
Oh yeah, good question. So it was when I studied abroad in Spain and traveling through Morocco and Europe and learning about the EU, and I remember this professor, I learned about human rights, and he had been to 18 out of the 20 countries in Latin America, so that was inspirational. And then when I went to volunteer in Chiapas and learning from the indigenous and the wisdom, I realized, you know what, I want to live in countries, not travel from point A to point B, stay in a hotel for a night or 2, but I want to feel, touch, taste, smell, and what better way than living there. So then I still graduated in aviation, but also got a degree in international business. So afterwards, I moved to Sydney, worked for Lynn Chocolate, and did the Peace Corps in Paraguay. Then next thing you know, I'm doing consulting work for the U.S. government, USAID projects all over the world. And, oh yes, education. So it was when I was in Afghanistan and working with leaders from all over the world, and I found it interesting, like, oh, how lucky. U.S. government, Afghan Central Bank, nonprofits, just people from all over the world, South Africa, private sector companies. And as you know, what happened in Afghanistan, right? Very challenging. But what I found that was fascinating is I was working with experts from all over the world, with PhDs from Harvard, no matter where, but they all had a truth with a big T. Oh, how lucky you are that you have the truth, how lucky you are that you have the truth, and how lucky you are that you have the truth. And the privilege I had as a consultant, but also my experiences, that I listened, I dialogued with every individual. So I saw the truth with small t's. And bringing those truths together would have been amazing, but we're always so busy with busyness, and there's a meeting, get to point A, point B, but there's never a dialogue, there's never listening. So I became fascinated by humans and the challenges and how knowledge is constructed. So obviously in my profession, I couldn't ask questions, I would get in trouble. And academia would give me the space to ask those questions. So that's where I decided to do a doctorate degree and get into education.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, our next speaker, please welcome English faculty from Fort Steilacoom, Chanel Galloway.
Is this on? Okay. So I'm going to sit up here. I'm Chanel Galloway. I'm an English faculty. I'm actually an adjunct faculty. Been here since about 2018. I got here right out of grad school, so I sort of have been in education and academia since I was 18 and kind of got through here. So technically, I'm more of a like skipped generation college student. I have one set of grandparents that went to college, but my grandmother, my mom's parents did go to college. My grandmother unfortunately died when I was very young, and we didn't really have that much contact with my mom's biological father, so I didn't really grow up with them. My mom was a teen mom. My biological father was also a teenager, so I sort of grew up with that. So my mom never really even finished high school, and then she remarried to somebody who barely finished high school, and we moved to Wyoming. From California to Wyoming when I was in elementary school. We went to Colorado for a couple of years, but moved back to Wyoming right before I started high school and stayed there. So I always kind of assumed I would go to college. Like, I don't know why, like where in my mind, I just knew I was going. I didn't know anything about college. I didn't know anybody. There was nobody around me or no one in my life that went to college. I just did really well at school, and people just talked to me as though I would be going to college. So I was like, yes, of course I'm going. And then probably in high school is when I started, we had guidance counselors, and they would just ask me, oh, what college are you going to, instead of like asking if I would. So I just sort of like assumed that was going to be my step anyway. The town where I grew up in Wyoming was very small and very rural, so our nearest even two-year college was 2.5 hours away. They didn't have Running Start, but they had concurrent enrollment, so I did do that because they didn't really have like an advanced placement class. You were either one of the dumb kids or you were one of the advanced students, and you just automatically got put into concurrent enrollment. So it wasn't really a choice that I made consciously, it was just sort of made for me. So I think I have a little bit of a different journey than everyone else in that sense. I just sort of was like, yes, I will be going. People just assumed that I would. However, at home, it was a little bit different. My family was very blue collar, and they weren't discouraging from going to college, but these days they sort of believe that any sort of formal education is just one step into communism. So it was always a very like interesting conversation where they're like very proud of me for like doing something succeeding at what I wanted to do, but didn't really care that much that I was going to college. They would have rather that I got married at 18 and just lived the same kind of life they did. So I was kind of had this dichotomy of like going to school and being like amazing and like doing so well, and everyone was like, you're gonna do great things, and then at home I'm just being like, cool, whatever. I also grew up in a very devout Mormon household, so they were like, cool, whatever, your main job is to find a good husband and have lots of babies. If you get a degree in the process of doing that, fine, but remember that your place is a woman is being a mom and being a member of this church. So they still, again, my dad was like, okay, well, he promised to pay for college. And then we got to college and he was like, I don't know about this. And then he was like, actually, I think college is mostly for people who want to either be a doctor or a nurse or a teacher. I didn't want to do either. I wanted to be a writer. So I studied English, and I very much stuck with that. Nobody ever told me not to, other than my parents. So I was like, if I'm going to go to college, I'm going to do something that I love, and I'm not going to be miserable the whole time, because that was not what I wanted. Another kind of facet into me going to college was I am the oldest of 7, so my parents had a lot of kids. And we lived in this very small rural town, and I knew that I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to end up fretting about money and like being sort of miserable with my life choices that I saw my parents sort of come to grips with over and over again. So way to get out of that was college, and I was like, that's going to be my step out. So I did the concurrent enrollment at college. I talked to a lot of people. Fortunately, a lot of my friends and peers were also going to college. A lot of them were planning to go so they could find husbands, but they were also going to college. So I sort of had them to fall back on. And the universities would come and do like fairs at our school. And I was like, I guess I'll just go to that one, because I had friends that were going to Utah State. I had never visited a college campus. I filled out an application, and they were like, okay, what major do you want? And I said, oh, I'm going to do English because I want to be a writer. And they're like, oh, what emphasis do you want? And I was like, I didn't even know you could, I didn't know there were different emphases. I thought you just went and studied English. I didn't know. And so I chose creative writing. And I went. The first time I stepped foot there was during the orientation, a couple of weeks before school started. And all of my roommates were a few generations into college. They were legacy students. Their parents had been at Utah State. They all had they were talking about all their graduation trips that their parents went on. I had a roommate who literally was like, oh, my dad's dentistry lost so much money. We weren't sure that I was going to get to go to the Bahamas for my senior trip. And I was like, yeah, my senior trip was my parents moved me down here. They bought me a miniature TV and a rice cooker. That was my senior trip, was them being like, we need more space for your sisters, get out. So I was and I very much felt out of place. I was very quiet in class. I also did not network very well with any of my professors. I mostly was quiet because I didn't want my professors to think I was dumb, because I came from this podunk school in Wyoming that in retrospect was actually a pretty good school. But we also had very low reading scores, so much so that our principal instigated a mandatory reading class to get everyone's reading level up. And we were reading Hank the Cowdog books as 10th graders. If you don't know what that is, it's a book that's 4th grade reading level with an anthropomorphic dog. And so a lot of my classmates were reading that, and I was like, okay, so maybe I'm not at college level. So I just very much in class would go, not say a whole lot, turn in my work, and leave. And probably in the last couple of years, I started to be okay, I think I'm gonna have to start networking and getting to know people, my professors. So I started opening up a little bit more. And thankfully, because when I went to grad school, I had to get recommendation letters, and I had to have 3 of them, and I was I took 2 college professors twice. So I asked them, and I had to find another one, and she actually turned me down because she didn't remember me. So I was oh no. So when I went to grad school, I very much put forth the effort of I am going to get to know my professors, I am going to network. But I did take a little break between undergrad and graduate school. I kept running out of money during undergrad, so I ended up paying for most of it myself. I did get Pell Grants. And I didn't really have a lot of scholarships, but I worked, and I would sometimes work 2 jobs, and I would have to take leaves of absence. I think I took every couple of semesters, I would just have to take a semester off so I could save up. And a lot of my roommates were why are you doing that? Just get a loan. And I was no, I'm so scared of loans. I'm so scared of money. I had no financial literacy. And so I graduated a semester late, technically. And then I took 3 years off because I was I thought I wanted to go into editing and publishing, and then realized I had visited New York and LA, and I was terrified of both of those places, and I was too poor to go be poor in either of those places. I couldn't even get money to go be poor in New York. So I decided not to do that, and I was I don't know. So I ran away to France and was an au pair. I got engaged to a British dude, and then came home, and I was working at a university at the University of Utah and their School of Music. And I was sort of feeling in a rut because I was like, I don't know what I want to do. But I was on campus and I was like, I really love this environment of academia and like being on campus. And I really missed being in class and having that exchange of ideas and thoughts and practicing my craft. So while I was there, I decided to apply to grad schools, and I didn't intend to go for an MFA. I applied to I reached out to a couple different places, but only one emailed back. Three emailed back, and only one of them sent me a personal message back. And so I ended up going there. And it was really great. It ended up being a very small and very intimate program. And I went there saying like, oh, I want to teach. So it did help me better my craft, and I have a thesis now that's going to get published as a novel. But it mostly just helped me build a network, and I'm still in communication with a lot of my like peers there and my professors, and they were the ones that sort of encouraged me to like be more raw and true with my background. I had one professor who I would be like, oh yeah, I grew up kind of poor, like in this little podunk town, and she said, oh wow, you hide it well. And I was like, that makes me really proud, but also it's a little bit weird that you said that. And so I actually wrote about a rural small town in the West, and it was probably like the rawest thing I've ever written. And so I was like, it just gave me the confidence to sort of like be more real, and realize that like I'm not the only person out there that has like gone through all these non-traditional forms of education, and that it's like important to have these examples of different ways of going through education, because I also, I didn't get internships. I didn't, I had roommates that didn't have to work during the school year because their parents paid for everything, and so. Even though I sort of stayed in the same field, I did have to shift a little bit to get what I wanted. So my sort of overarching sort of message is, I always say I'm like a terrible like marketer for college. So I'm like, you don't need to go to college to be successful. You don't need a university degree to technically be successful and survive through life. But there's so much more in higher education and getting that formal education that you probably wouldn't be able to get anywhere else, especially if you're coming from a disadvantaged background. College offers a very centralized resource center that opens up so many things that I would never have been aware of if I hadn't gone to college with that. So that's sort of my story.
All right. Chanel, English faculty. Any questions? From anybody? Any questions?
What's the name of your book?
I always feel weird when people are like, tell me about your book. And I'm like, no, I don't want you to read it. But also please buy it because I want money from it. But it is called The Valley of Sage and Juniper, and it comes out next March. So it'll, have a couple more months, but yeah.
All right. Thank you. All right. These are wonderful stories. We'd love to have like just 20 more, but we have one wonderful speaker left, and please don't go away. We do want networking afterwards and meet more folks that you haven't met before. That would be just wonderful to stick around for a little bit longer. So our next speaker, English faculty from Puyallup, please welcome Derek Estrada.
I love being in front of crowds. I've been doing this since I was a kid, so this is really nice. So I guess the best place to start is my village, because I think that as humans we desire greatly to have villages, to have tribes that we can depend on, that we can look to for guidance. And that's something very difficult to come by. And, you know, the reason we need villages, the reason that we need tribes is, I always attribute it to something that I've found in a lot of cultures, but I always reference West African culture and their desire to tell stories. And they used to call these storytellers griots. And the important thing about telling stories is every journey requires a language, because language is something that we need in order to gain access and to gain knowledge. Language is important so that we can communicate in spaces along our journeys. And that's what stories do for us, is they give us an opportunity to understand journeys. And so when I look at my village, my grandparents, none of my grandparents went past sixth grade education. My grandparents on my dad's side were Mexican immigrants from Chihuahua to El Paso, Texas. My mother's family migrated from Arkansas, Texarkana, Arkansas to Santa Barbara, California during the Great Migration. And for those of you that don't know about the Great Migration, it was a transfer of black populations because of the fear of the South. And so when you come to my parents, you understand that education wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a conversation because it wasn't something that was looked at as a potential journey for my parents. In my father's family, you know, my Mexican family, a lot of their perspectives were about men going to the workforce and providing for the family, being the breadwinners. And so that's what my father preached every day in the house. Responsibility, hard work, being a man, right? A lot of that machismo, you know. And I didn't really embody any of that. My mother, on the other hand, understood the value of education because it's the one thing she always wanted and could never attain. And one of her, I always call it her first big girl job, was working. She was an administrative assistant at UCLA. And she wanted so bad to be a part of that university. She felt like she deserved the opportunity to be a part of that university, but she understood that, or she felt like that time had passed her by. And so at home, I get these warring perspectives. You need to go and be a man, you need to go work. And then from my mother's side, you need to get an education. It's the only way you're gonna have any success in this world. And so I and my family was considered the golden child. I was the one that was gonna be the it. I was the one that was gonna be the achiever, right? And so they poured all of their resources into me. And at the time as a kid, I didn't understand what that really meant in the grand scheme of things. I just understood that I had a journey that they were trying to prepare me for, a journey to higher education. And so I took that journey. I took it seriously because that's what I was told to do. And then around high school, that journey got to a point where my parents couldn't speak the language as well. And they couldn't really communicate to me what I needed to do to keep going on that journey. And then, because of that, our relationships became divisive. Because they're giving me information that doesn't align with the journey I'm on. And so when I go home, 15, 16, 17 years old, and I'm telling my parents, no, that's not what I'm gonna do. I can't do that. You know, my mother's like, excuse me? You know, I have, my mother, they call her the warden in my family because she's very stern, she's very serious. But, you know, challenging my parents was something that was difficult to do. And so when it came time to apply to colleges, you know, that had been ingrained in my mind that I was gonna apply to colleges. But when it came time to do so, nobody knew how to do it. Nobody knew how to fill out the applications. Nobody knew how much an application would cost. Nobody knew how to pick a college. Nobody knew what tests I needed to take, right? And so all of that I had to figure out, I had to navigate. But the issue was is that one of the hardest parts about education is, especially for someone like me who fell between the poor and the wealthy. I was in that space where my parents made just enough that I couldn't get help and access. Okay? And so when it came time to pay for these applications, which at the time were anywhere from $50 to $80 per application, my parents was, well, I don't have that, right? And so as someone who's been on this journey for 16, 17 years now, to be told that we don't have what you need to continue on this journey that we're making you take, that was crushing, because I was just like, what am I supposed to do? So I had already had a job, of course, because my dad made sure we always worked. I've had a job since I was 10 years old. All the money I had saved up, I spent on college applications. And I got into every school that I applied to, and I felt so accomplished, right? And I was like, I did it. But then came time to fill out all the paperwork, to make a choice of what college to go to figure out what the financial aid process was going to be like. Where am I going to get the funding for this? Oh shit, I got in, but this shit cost, excuse my language, it cost $30,000 a year. I mean, that makes me quite angry, $30,000 a year, but I don't know how to pay for this. And so the first thing that came out of my parents' mouth, because this is all they know, because they don't really fluently speak the language, we'll get a loan. And that's scary at 18 years old to think about taking on a $30,000 loan for the next potential 4 and probably 5 years of my life, right? And I don't even know what I want to do yet. I haven't even had the time to think about that. I've had the time to manage the journey. And so I decided to go, I took out a loan, and I flunked my whole first semester. I was being crushed under the pressure of not only being the golden child, crushing under the pressure of working full time, because the minute I turned 18, I had all adult bills. Hey, you gotta pay for food, you gotta pay for rent, you gotta pay for gas, you gotta pay for your car, all that. So managing both, but I couldn't speak the language of higher education. I didn't know how to navigate it. I was in a foreign town on a foreign journey, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do. And so I flunked out. I gave up on myself. And then here comes the more pressure, right? Because I was the golden child. I was supposed to be able to do this with a breeze, right? Why aren't you being accomplished? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you still the A student? And I had nothing for him. I had nothing for him. And so I abandoned education and did what my dad told me to do. I just worked. I just worked, and I worked, and I worked, and I worked. And finally I got to a job. I was delivering water for Arrowhead. Do you have Arrowhead? I'm from California, so I don't know. Yeah, I was delivering water for Arrowhead. And on that job, your bosses, sometimes they follow you around, make sure you're handling all the protocol. And so the whole day, you talk to your boss, you're doing your job, just having a good time, being social. And so towards the end of the day, he pulls me aside, and I think this is the time he's going to talk to me about how well I did that day. And he says, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said, "Excuse me, sir." He said, "What are you doing here working this job? You don't belong here. This is not where you belong." And what I realized in that moment was I was so afraid of taking on a journey that I had no direction on and I had no help on, that I gave up on myself. I gave up on my ability. And that's what happens with a lot of first-gen students, is they feel so lost. They feel so unsure because they don't have anybody telling them, yes, go that way. Yes, ask these questions. Yes, use this language. Yes, talk to this person. Yes, make friends with that person. Because there's no one to tell them those small things, they give up on themselves, right? Because the system wasn't created for them to get through so easily, right? I always envision our education system very similar to how it is in LA. It's a dog-eat-dog place, right? You either survive or you get chewed up and pushed to the wayside. There's no in between. And that's what education does to our first-gen students. And so maybe about 3 months after that conversation, I quit the job. I was 23 years old and I decided I'm going to go back to school. But the hard part about going back to school was admitting that I had to let go of my village. I had to let go of my parents, not in a a love way. It was that they could no longer help me on my journey. And the even harder part was I had to find a new village of people. And so if you've noticed, all of our speakers today have talked about networking, talking to professors, talking to counselors, talking to advisors, talking to other students. I had to build a network of people that had been on that journey before. And it was even more helpful if they looked something like me, if they had similar struggles as me. But you don't know that unless you share your stories, like we're doing here today. And so I took that journey and I started finding people little by little. I still didn't know what to do. By this time I had thought about 5 different majors. And finally I was in an English class, and a lovely professor, she's still a part of my life. She was one of my references for this job. And she walks up to me after class and she says, "You know you can do this, right?" And I said, "Do what?" She said, "You can be an English professor." She said, "We need you to be, actually." What do you mean, need me? We need people who look like you to be in this classroom, because you're not the only one that was lost on your journey. There are other kids behind you, lost on their journeys, right? And if you do the work to get here, you can be the one to tell them that they can do this job too. And that was so empowering for me. And that happened at the community college level. And that's why I love the community college level, because I found, I've worked at the 4-year and I've worked at the 2-year, but at the 2-year, there's some people that got so much love in their heart because they've been through the struggle. Because a lot of times at the community college level, there are students here that have been forgotten, that have been eaten up and thrown to the wayside. And I know what that feels like. And I was so much better than that, and so many of our students are so much better than that. They deserve so much more than that. And so when she gave me that was enough direction to get me going. And I've never looked back. And I'm here today because someone told me their story. Because I'm telling other people their stories. And I keep bringing up kids behind me. People always talk about the people in the past that have helped them grow. And I always mention Harriet Tubman, not for what she created, but for one thought she had. Right? She crossed that line of freedom, and one of her first thoughts was, I need to go back. And I don't know too many people that are that selfless, right? To attain a level of freedom that they've been going for their whole life, to reach the pinnacle of their goals. And the first thing they think about before celebrating, before planning the rest of their life, is to turn around and find some more people to save. Find some more people to help on that journey. And so as storytellers, as griots of our first generation experiences, I think it is imperative that we share our stories with each other, with our students, with our communities, because we are nothing without our villages, we are nothing without our tribes. And the most important part about finding a tribe and being a part of a tribe is actually giving back to the tribe that supported you, the tribe that brought you here. And so I just want to say here, I know they're not here, but I want to thank all of the people that have been in my tribe, that continue to be a part of my tribe, because I don't know if I'd have a first-gen story to tell without them. And that's what brought me here today. And so I thank you for your time.
Derek, everybody. Any questions for Derek? Got a mic on either side of the room. Any questions? Good. All right. Excellent. Thank you. All right. Round of applause for Derek and then all of our speakers today. This is what EDI Cares strives to do, and that's, be that person to kind of help out with those little extras to get people through. We don't want people stopping out, quit going to class for whatever reason. We're there to bridge that gap and get them to the next quarter get them to the next day, whatever we need to do, from anything from encouragement to support, cheerleading, to this is who you need to talk to, all those kinds of things. So I appreciate and thank you for all your stories, and thank you for coming. We hope to continue this maybe next year, because the 8th of November is actually designated as First Generation Day, and so we will celebrate this every year. So thank you again for coming today, and we would love you to come up, and if you want to get a selfie or a photo with any of our speakers, or just meet them, talk to them, thank them for being here, all those things. And then also for anybody who has students who might need to get connected to resources, services, and help, we have a QR code over here you can scan. The top one there is for, and of course that's right outside of our office down in the both the Puyallup campus in A106, and then downstairs here in 322. And so get students connected, bring them down. We will connect them and help them out. So thank you very much for coming, and have a wonderful, wonderful day, and go Raiders!